Lesson 3, the macro model. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. While teaching a senior course in strategic management at Dallas Baptist University, I prepared my students for an exit test that covered many of the subdisciplines of business. One of those was economics. So in the review for the test, I had 50 minutes to review everything in economics. This caused me to come up with the macro model, which you see before you now. My intention was, how can we make the complex simple? Albert Einstein has a great quote about this. He says, "You only understand something well when you can explain it simply." This is macroeconomics explained simply. Sometimes I call it my model of twos because there's two of everything, and when I'm in a hurry, I can explain it in 2 minutes. Let's look at the macro model together. The two evils of macroeconomics are on the left side of the diagram, inflation, and on the right side of the diagram, unemployment. These are the two things we want to avoid. The model in front of you now mostly comes from Lord Keynes and his idea that these things balance each other. Now, if you spend 36 hours with me in a class at Dallas Baptist University, toward the end, we will make some conclusions that this model does not always work. It is a way of understanding macroeconomics. People form their own opinion as the class goes on, but everyone agrees that on the left side of the diagram, inflation is an evil, and on the right side, unemployment is an evil. This model attempts to say, how can we avoid these two evils? And again, Keynes said, they balance each other. You can't have both at the same time. In history, he has been proven to be wrong. We have had something called stagflation, which is both of these at the same time. But for now, let me just leave it at introducing that there are two evils of macroeconomics, inflation and unemployment. Government, taxes, and spending. There are two entities who can act on the economy. The first in your diagram is the government. The government can do two things. It can tax and it can spend. As I've said in many of my podcasts, the government has no money. It must take from one group before it can give to another group. This is why, by the way, that it violates our ideas of Christian economics. Sergei Seidamatov and I unpack that in chapter number 6 of our book, Biblical Economic Policy. But for today, we're just stating the fact that the government can do two things to affect the economy. They can tax and they can spend. The Federal Reserve. Well, the Federal Reserve is our central bank. They have two things they can do. They can change the money supply and they can change interest rates. When you learn more about it, you find out that these are essentially the same thing, but it is my model of twos, and I want to have two of everything, and in general, most people will agree. The Federal Reserve Bank is not an entity of the government. They are separate from the government. More on that in a later lesson. But for now, we'll see that the Federal Reserve Bank is the central bank of the United States. How they function and what they do is essentially for today two things. They determine money supply through their 12 regional banks, and they determine the interest rates at a meeting they have every 6 weeks in Washington, D.C. Upcoming lessons. This diagram contains everything we teach in economics except for two things. Since it is the model of twos, it has two mistakes in it as well. One is there's no subject of regulation, but then there's not in our textbook either that we teach with. The second thing is this model should be tilted just a little bit. The right end should be higher than the left end. This indicates that the economy is always moving up. So with those two exceptions, other than that, this covers every subject that we're going to talk about the rest of our time together in our other lessons about macroeconomics. See, if you were in the classroom at the university, we'd have a chapter on GDP, which is a measure of growth on the left side. We'd have a chapter on inflation. We'd have at least one chapter on unemployment. We'd have at least a chapter on taxes, one on spending, one on the Federal Reserve, one on interest rates, one on money supplies, one on recessions. See, this is the entire economic model tied into one diagram, simply the model of twos, or as I call it, the macro model. Economic humanism. My podcast number 21 is titled Economic Humanism. And I introduced that just briefly today because this gets to the heart of Christian economics. It asks the question, what should we as humans do, and what do we rely on God to do? Sometimes this is called being on the horns of the dilemma between relying on divine sovereignty from God and man's responsibility. How much should we tax? How much should we spend? How much should we change interest rates? How much should we change money supply? See, if you're an atheist, you don't ask those questions. Life is easy. There's no God, so humans must do everything. But if you believe in a greater being, any greater being, not only Christ as God, if you believe in any greater being, you believe we should do some things. Some things should be left to this greater being, whom we as Christians call God through Jesus Christ. Those are many of the questions we'll ask in our upcoming lessons. The macro model, lesson 3. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them online or in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.